because I've had multiple people email me asking about the recording, and I accidentally didn't record the one with the teen program. So
Oh no.
I know, I felt really badly. It was a good conversation too.
There've been several Zoom meetings that I've been in where we're like, we should have recorded that one.
Yeah.
Which was like not a thing we were able to do like in-person meetings, right?
Right.
One of the benefits, I guess, of this platform is we can be like, let's record this like brainstorm that we're having.
Yes. But I have to say, I think it was Julian who was talking about being a sort of serial registerer of, when I was coming back from getting my tissues, of like registering for stuff because she wants the recording. I have been guilty of that too. And not quite so good at watching them when the time comes.
Yeah. Best intentions. That's why people's thinking about their behavior and the actual behaviors, two very different things. Anybody who does surveys knows that very well. Never ask people what they're going to do. Ask people what they did do.
That's a great point.
And even then, be suspect.
I don't know if my eyes like psychosomatically, you said the word tissues, Annie, and I'm like, sorry.
Yeah, my eyes always seem to start watering whenever I'm like presenting or doing a program on Zoom. Like, ugh.
We're like syncing up via Zoom now.
Apparently.
Got more folks who've joined. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Just giving a little bit of a buffer for anyone who's jumping from Zoom to Zoom, zooming around.
I'm so excited. So many people.
Yeah.
Madison. Anna.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. This is great.
Yeah.
So exciting.
I think we've got a good quorum right now, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. I'm Julene Chevalier. I am the division director of the National Art Education Association Museum Education Division. To give you a little idea of where I am situated and me, I am a white woman. I have a round face. I wear purple cat eye glasses. My hair right now is a light pink. It is short. I'm wearing a blue shirt, which is actually a dress, but you can't see that. And I am sitting on my couch in front of a wall that has the corner of a large screen print showing. It's just the edge. It's some fire escapes from a city scene. And I'm going to have the co-presenters today. I'm just here to introduce things and get things started and do some facilitation. Gwen and Annie, we're really excited to have you here and be with us today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julene. Hi, everybody. This is Gwen Fernandez. I am the representative-elect for the Pacific region for NAEA's Museum Education Division. Just as a way of description, I am also a white woman. I have long, very long now in COVID times, brown hair with lots of gray peeking in. I'm wearing some of my favorite hoop acetate multicolored earrings and a yellow sleeveless top. I am in a room with a white wall, and there is a brick wall off to my right. So I'm really excited to be with you all today, and I will pass things off to Annie.
Hi, everybody. My name's Annie Leist. I wear a number of hats, actually. I'm an artist, but I am also an associate educator at the Museum of Modern Art and in the Community and Access Programs Department. Actually have at least one or two of my colleagues in the room too, so hi guys. And I am a cis white woman. I am my pronouns are she, her. I am basically I have clean hair, which is super exciting for me. Thank you for this opportunity, for the excuse. It is currently pulled back. It's parted on the side, and it's theoretically a reddish color, but I have some of the roots creeping in as well. I'm wearing gold dangly hoop earrings and sort of a pinkish red top, and I'm sitting on a brown sofa with a sort of taupe colored wall behind me. And as since I'm not on at a desk, my computer is probably going to shift a little bit. So you may see some of the framed prints and things and art on the wall behind me. One other thing about me, just so you all are aware, is that I identify as having a disability. I have extremely low vision and no vision in my right eye and very low vision in my left. So that is part of why museum access is a subject of interest to me. So back to you, Gwen.
Thank you, Annie. So as part of our sort of way of being together today, we're gonna ask that when you speak for the first time, you also introduce yourself, provide some verbal description as you feel comfortable, and testing that out if it's the first time you might be doing that. And also just a reminder, every time that you do speak during the program, if you would begin with your name, this really helps us as a large group just know who's speaking at the time. It also helps with clarity on captioning and our transcription. With that being said, we are providing closed captions today via Rev's automatic program. So you can enable those by scrolling down to the bottom of your window. You should see closed captioning as an icon and turn your subtitles on. Julene taught me something at the start of this, that you can adjust the size of those captions. So you can also do that. As some continuing housekeeping, we are recording the session for today, and this will be available on our YouTube channel, where there will also be captions available. So if you want to return to something that was said or you want to share it with colleagues, that's where it will be shortly. And also, we are not using any slides today in order to really facilitate a conversation as much as we can with our large group. But also, as a reminder, when we engage in these digital platforms and anytime we're presenting, to really be mindful of how much we use PowerPoints and rely on that visual information, which may not be accessible to all of our audiences. So those are sort of all of our housekeeping items. Did I miss anything, Annie or Julene? Cool. So then we will jump into some of our expectations for how we want to engage with one another today. So as you feel comfortable, we invite you to turn on your camera. Part of the peer-to-peer initiative is really to create conversation and connect with one another. So we find that that's really nice. Of course, we understand for many reasons, some may not feel comfortable or be able to turn on your video, and that's totally okay. Also, if you want to change your name, add your pronouns or your institutional affiliations, you can do that by clicking on the 3 dots in your own screen. You can update that information there. We are super excited that so many people have joined us today. This is very, very exciting. With that being said, we are mindful that large groups can make it challenging for facilitating conversation, and we want to enable as many folks as possible to join in and share as much as we can. So with that being said, options are to use the chat to share comments, questions, and ideas. We ask that you do stay muted if you're not speaking, but when you do want to share something with your voice, please feel free to unmute yourself and bring your voice into the space with a reminder to share your name. Let's see, what else? So one thing that we're hoping to do with this program is to model some practices that we are using and working with in our own spaces. So just being mindful, as we do need to maybe rely on the chat a little more today with our large group, is just to also remember that in these programs that can create some challenges for anyone who might be joining via phone, or the chat function may not be accessible. So we will do our best to voice what's happening in the chat as we go along today, and making that visible with our language as much as possible. I think. And then Julene will be helping us out by dropping some of our questions and things into the chat as we go along. So look to follow there as well. I think that captures all of it. Anything, Annie, you want to add?
No, I think you got it, Gwen. Thank you.
Cool. I'll pass it over to you for our icebreaker.
Cool. So, so we're going to just do a little bit of an icebreaker that we're going to ask you to put a couple of words into the chat. The first being a word that sort of describes where you are in terms of accessibility and inclusion in the digital space, like in your work or in your life. You know, are you an explorer? Are you evolving? Are you experimenting? What is another word that might describe sort of where you are at in this moment in terms of thinking about access and inclusion in the digital space? And then we're also going to ask you to put a word that describes your intention for joining this session today. Are you curious? Are you wanting to share some sort of a single word or maybe a short phrase that describes what you're choosing, why you chose to be here today, and what you're hoping to get out of this program? We'll be reading some of these as they're starting to come in.
I see interested newbie, learning, aspirational, experimenting and exploring. Lots of exploring and learning, lifelong learners. Not surprising with museum educators.
And Luigi says he's a learner too.
Yes, yes. Luigi always makes an auditory presence.
Teresa is saying that she's expanding, but also looking to connect today. I'm seeing a lot of experimenting from folks, listening.
I see open and motivated from Laura.
Yeah.
That's great.
Want to evolve more. That's great. Looking for new ideas, deepening knowledge.
Some experimenting happening too. That's great. We'd love to hear about that a little bit later in the program.
Yeah, really excited to hear about what you're trying out, what you're thinking about trying out.
New and open. Welcome. We're glad to have you.
Ooh, advocacy. I see.
Trying to grow as an advocate. Yes.
And wondering how to train colleagues. So a train the trainer model.
Perhaps. Love it. These are great, guys. Thank you so much.
Like maybe it's slowing down, so I think maybe everyone's had a chance to share lots of learning, experimenting, acknowledging that there's space to grow and to evolve, and also thinking about how this work relates to our colleagues, both within our institutions, but also as a larger community of practice as well. Yeah, go ahead, Annie.
I was just going to say that I think this is a great opportunity with everybody who's like, I was looking at Kristen's last comment about being well-intentioned and wanting to do better. I think that's a wonderful sort of way of thinking about, you know, what our intentions are, like coming together to learn from and support one another, to sort of help each other learn as this, because this space is really new to a lot of us and our audiences. So, you know, we can share what we've tried, we can see what we've learned and ways we might deepen our practice. And then, you know, also think together about what's next. Where do we go from here? Because this virtual space is probably not going away anytime soon.
Yeah. And this is Gwen again. It does offer us many new opportunities. I think certainly the chance to experiment, and the chance to maybe reach new audiences or engage with our existing audiences in new ways. And of course, it's always a space for us to continue learning. So with peer-to-peer, that's really our goal, is to come together as a community and share resources, share ideas, and learn from one another. So Annie and I will be facilitating, but we aren't prepared to give you sort of a lecture or how-to today. We really want to create as much space to share and collaborate. And we're also very aware that the topic of accessibility is quite broad. And there are many different directions that we could go in, and we have just now 45 minutes left in our time together. So we also really want to honor the interests of the group that has, and the needs of the group that have convened today. So we're really kind of embracing an emergent process. And we recognize that we may not be able to answer every question or have enough time to go into the depth that some may want. And that might be opportunities for us to have follow-up peer-to-peer sessions in the fall on some of these topics. So those are some of our intentions for today. With that all shared and brought into the space, thank you all for sharing what you're bringing here today. We want to launch into our conversation together. So our first topic to explore is we're very curious to know what some of the access priorities are for you and your teams in this moment, and maybe how they have evolved. We're 5 months, time is irrelevant, 4 or 5 months into this new phase of existence. So maybe how have your priorities shifted and changed since the start of the pandemic? And what about your audiences? Have you noticed anything shifting and changing about your practice? I'll share, so you're thinking about that, and Julene can drop that question in the chat. She has already. So prior to this, or at the start of the pandemic, I was the interpretation and accessibility manager at Phoenix Art Museum. And I was laid off from my position 3 weeks into the pandemic in early April. So I was sort of at the outset thinking about many of these questions, but have been outside of that professional space since then. And immediately for us, one of the questions that I had was, we had to end our program for people with dementia and their caregivers early. And returning to the goals of that program, the social connection is one of the top goals. So I was very concerned about how we might continue that aspect, even if we couldn't continue our in-person. So we were experimenting with sharing materials via email, and we learned from our audience that phone calls were really one of the ways that we could do that. And we had a volunteer base that we could mobilize to just do weekly phone calls or bi-monthly phone calls, just checking in and making sure that our audiences felt connected to the museum and we felt connected to them. That's one example from my practice. Is there anything, Annie, you would like to share?
Sure, yeah. And once we've gotten the ball rolling, again, I want to encourage you all to as you're thinking of your responses, please feel free to start to put them in the chat. And we'll potentially invite some folks to elaborate out loud about theirs. So while you're thinking about that, one thing, I was extremely fortunate in that I started my job at MoMA about 7 weeks before the pandemic began. And I have been lucky in that MoMA has kept on full-time staff, although what they did do was end, unfortunately, in the context of our freelance educators, which meant that any programming that happened during this time had to be conducted directly by our very few staff members, as opposed to our dozens of freelance educators that allowed us to reach such a large audience. So one of our priorities first was kind of regrouping from that and determining what our bandwidth was early on, but then also kind of starting to think about how to adapt our existing programs to, from an in-person format to an online format. And we also sort of felt a lot like we needed to, help our audiences transition as well. And one way we really did this, one good example of this, was our Art Insight program, which was our program for folks who are blind or have low vision. That was really the first program that we pivoted from. It's normally a monthly program at the museum in person. And we started off doing it this spring as an every 2 weeks program online. And it was a wonderful learning journey with our participants as well, because a lot of them were unfamiliar with some of these digital platforms. So we had to sort of figure out how we could help them become more comfortable on the platform. So the platform in our case, Zoom, was actually just a platform and not some sort of hindrance or barrier to their engagement. And we also found that initially social interaction was a #1 priority for our audiences, but as time has gone on, it's been sort of a more subtle shift to not just straight up social connection, but sort of having the collective experience of engaging with art. So that collective piece is still really important to folks, but they really do want to think about art as well. So that's kind of been how things have evolved for us. I would love to hear from, and Gwen and I would love to hear from some of you all in terms of what's going on with you. What are your priorities? What are your audience's priorities? How have these things shifted? And again, if the chat is difficult for you, you can come on mic and share things audibly, but we'd love to hear if someone wants to speak rather than typing in the chat, you're welcome to say, I'd like to say something in the chat if you're able to, and we can call on you.
So I'm seeing that Kinneret has made a comment about key access staff in the institution were laid off, and so their access programs for adults are on pause. Kinneret is working to develop accessible materials for students and teachers, make sure the resources that they offer are ADA compliant, and working towards virtual student tours that prioritize sensorial engagement and or visual description. So yeah, one of the key impacts of this economic and world crisis is losing staff. Yeah, that's really hard. Rita Alvarez mentioned creating virtual tours with accessibility in mind during the pandemic and making sure to improve our physical space at the museum to provide for better access overall.
It's an interesting point, I think, that Rita, that you bring up, just about not only sort of thinking about how we keep programs going or how we adapt programs, but also what are the opportunities while our spaces are closed that we can work on projects that maybe we weren't able to prioritize. I know I was also gearing up to think about a big campaign for, alt text and descriptions for our images on a website that had just been launched. So that was another way that I was thinking about pivoting as well.
Diane from the Milwaukee Art Museum mentions that there are some positives to doing things virtually, which it can be more accessible to some audiences. So some students with disabilities who were really successful in their online summer camp, sometimes working parents who typically couldn't easily drop off or pick up students for an in-person summer camp could, if it was online, then they could do that. And so they're talking about how to continue offering those virtual options even when things are back to quote unquote normal and in person. Laura Westmoreland mentioned we prioritize maintaining relationships, taking our program for people with dementia and their care partners online, and providing at-home kits with reproductions for our sensory-friendly audience. Sensory-friendly audiences have expressed their priorities include maintaining normalcy in their schedules and finding alternatives to some of the digital resources. So great, keeping in touch with your intended audience and finding out what is best for them and what they most want is always key.
This is Annie. I'm sort of curious to add to our set of questions now, and you guys are welcome to continue to, again, put suggestions or topics you want to mention in the chat or come on mic and say them. But another question to sort of throw out there to add to this is, what programs have you been sort of straight adapting to this virtual platform, and have you been innovating in any ways, coming up with programs that maybe you wouldn't have done before, that are new now that you've been online? So throw that out there to augment the conversation.
And thank you, Annie. This is Gwen again. While you were speaking, Laura shared that prior to the shutdown, really felt like the momentum was picking up on providing CART services and ASL interpretation for their programs, but that momentum kind of slowed as they moved into the virtual world. And I think it comes to that advocacy piece you're mentioning here, Laura, about how to remind the institution that these are still priorities. And I might add that, you know, because of the ability to reach even more folks on a digital platform, even more necessary and needed to figure out how to bring those services into these digital spaces.
I want to call out, let's see, Myra's comment also, that you know, you've been focusing on developing partnerships with other organizations that work with access groups and work collaboratively to sort of form curricula. That's something that has been working really well with us as well. It's actually been a nice way that we can reach a lot of people sort of who already sort of have a connection to each other and sort of help maintain that connection. And we're looking at working with partnerships a lot going forward, I think.
This is Julene, and wanted to share a comment from Hannah Goodwin in the chat. Similarly to Annie, we shifted some of our tours online for some of our groups that couldn't gather. They sent tour stops via email with links that could be shared, but there's a lot that we can't get to. And some groups, like day programs that have at least temporarily disbanded, Hannah goes on to say that much on my mind have been how left out people who are deafblind are, and also people with multiple and complex disabilities who may need close physical contact. I'm assuming it's physical contact there. So yeah, absolutely. Access is never one size fits all, and there's lots of complexities there. Brian, oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna affirm that point that, you know, some folks have noticed that I've been hearing a lot from the disability community that all this virtual programming suddenly makes a lot of things more accessible. For example, if they're not comfortable leaving, or if transit is a huge issue, that's now not an issue anymore with virtual programming. But Hannah, you're absolutely right in pointing out that we still need to hold space for people who might not be able, like for whom virtual might not be as accessible as in real life would be. Yeah.
This is Julene again. I wanted to share Brian's comment that one thing that's come up is making sure that changes to operations due to COVID don't inadvertently make us less accessible. For example, potentially discontinuing wheelchair loans due to difficulty of sanitization, but the Access Committee was able to advocate for keeping them and establishing a cleaning protocol. Absolutely. Shana, I think, or it might be Shanna, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. Social interaction for older adults, including those with dementia, is one of their priorities. And they've been working with their local senior center and organizations to reach that audience. And Jamie Rosenfeld from the Hood Museum has talked about creating virtual armchair tours for senior living homes. So again, this opportunity to reach new audiences, but it's always, it feels like. Jamie Young mentions that before COVID, we were working on inclusive access initiatives. Prior to this, access was based on an adaptive model and reliant on requests. While the pandemic has paused our in-person and on-site initiatives, it's pushed forward and deepened our initiatives online, such as always having closed captions on videos and opening up some grants we could apply to with already established partners. Sorry, Ouija is very upset because the FedEx man is across the street. Persephone Allen also mentions we've been thinking about accessibility for programs in general and building captioning into all of our virtual programs, which wasn't always in the budget before. Their colleague in Access has also developed video visits, which are brief pre-recorded talks on 3 to 4 works of art and an art making prompt that can be watched by individuals with dementia and their caregivers.
That's great. I love all of the work that folks are doing to combat isolation in this point. And I think that's something that you know, I feel like one thing that we have all learned from being in positions of various levels of lockdown, depending on where you are in in the country, is that, you know, it can be challenging to be in your home. But I know one thing that we did from the very beginning was MoMA actually had some partnerships with some organizations that already worked with seniors who were homebound. And we have continued to work with those groups, and we're actually kind of learning a lot through working on those partnerships about what it's been like to reach out to folks who are not specifically seniors who are homebound. And I think sort of remembering what that isolation has felt like for us has made us a bit more sensitive in terms of working with folks who never get to necessarily get out of their apartment or don't feel comfortable, for example, traveling to a museum by themselves on the subway. We had at least one person join one of our programs who had never been to MoMA because she didn't feel comfortable traveling on the subway. And suddenly we had a new audience member who was a local person, but just wasn't comfortable with the transit situation. And I feel like now we all have this firsthand experience that can make us more sensitive to those kinds of folks.
Yeah, and thank you, Annie. This is Gwen again. Again, reminding everyone, if we're very chat heavy, which is great. And if we're comfortable in that space, we can keep using that. But if anybody does want to unmute themselves and join in and add their voice, just another reminder that you're welcome to do that. I love what you were saying, Annie, about, you know, and it's been echoed in many of the comments about learning from our audiences as we go along. And, you know, I think it's something that we always want to center in our work, being visitor-centered, but certainly working with different disability communities, just to not assume the needs of anyone or what people are looking for, but to really ask and to learn along the way. And I think I'm wondering if there's maybe some lessons learned from the group, anything, success stories, or, you know, things that didn't go the way you wanted to that taught you a lesson that might be helpful to those that are joining. And I do see that Madison is asking if anyone is experiencing groups feeling screen fatigue.
Yes. we did some, actually, you know what, I would love for my colleague Teresa, who I know is in the room, to talk a little bit about how we adjusted the timing of one of our programs at MoMA for adults versus kids who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Teresa, if you wouldn't mind, if you want to type it in the chat, you can, but if you wouldn't mind coming on mic and just talking about that as an example of making that adjustment, that would be awesome. And if she's not here, that's okay too. So I can begin.
This is Julie. Annie, she's here, but unfortunately her audio isn't working.
Oh no, okay. Well, then, sorry, Teresa. Then I can sort of speak and you can type in the chat if I've missed anything, but we have a program called Creatability that is for, and the reason I was asking Teresa to speak about it is that she is sort of the primary person who's working on this program right now, and I happen to know she was here. But we have a program called Creatability, which again was usually a program that was about half, like a two-hour program, felt like half a day in person in the museum that had, we had a kids section that happened in the mornings and an adult section that happened in the afternoons. And the program was for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we had some moments of socializing. We had moments of going up into the galleries and looking at artwork. And then we had an art making practice, an art making activity or studio activity afterwards. And obviously that format would have been challenging in real life. So we again started the adults section online and the kids section online. And we came up with different models for art making, sending prompts in advance or doing some live art making that was fairly simple with tools that folks would have had around the house. But the art making component was shifted in terms of time. And so each program started with like an hour of together time. And we found that the kids sort of were not, didn't necessarily have the attention span or had the this sort of interest in being on for an hour. So the program was made 45 minutes. And then we're actually now even looking about whether to continue with the kids online program. However, the adult program has stayed 45 minutes to an hour. And in some cases, just based on ones I've observed, could have gone longer. So I think it's going to vary from audience to audience in terms of how much time. For our Art Insight program, we are going at 90 minutes, in part because description itself, which is important for this audience of folks who are blind or have low vision, description takes a little bit longer. And so I feel like screen fatigue can still be an issue for this audience, but 90 minutes has seemed to be the sweet spot for that. I would love to hear what other people have found in terms of that.
Hi, this is Teresa. Is my mic working now?
Yay!
Okay, great. Sorry, just some cool computer issues. So my name's Teresa. I work with Annie at MoMA. I'm a white cis woman. In my living room, there's a brightly colored green patterned quilt behind me and half a painting of a nude woman above me that someone pointed out to me that maybe I should be more careful about, but it's okay. I think we're all art people, right? Annie, I caught the last part of what you said, so I think you pretty much covered it, but something else about the kids audience for our Creatability program was that I think parents weren't as kind of available to be there with their children to facilitate the program. Usually our Creatability program has families and siblings and friends who come and they all, create and make together. And so with the younger audience, I think parents just put their kids in front of their computer because they had other things that they needed to do. Whereas with the adult audience, almost every one of our participants had a family member or a friend with them with the program. So I think that kind of helped as well.
Thanks so much, Teresa. Glad your mic is working now.
Hi, this is Laura. How are you?
Hi.
For having me. So we have been shifting our Art Compass program, which is for teens and young adults on the autism spectrum, to an online model. We tried two different models. One was actually pre-recorded videos, working with an art therapist, and she did a great job. She had included a visual vocabulary and a checklist. And she did, so that was recorded just for people to use on their own, on own time. This is just when we closed because not knowing what people's schedules were, just kind of adapting to everything. Then we moved to another model where they were live virtual, all the language, right? Live virtual experiences for people on the spectrum. Same art therapist. And we did it for an hour and a half, which we were like, who knows if it's going to be too long. What worked out, she did, Molly Bassett did a wonderful job. She kind of broke the program down in components to keep it exciting and always changing. There was music involved, there was videos, there were slides, there were discussions, there were quizzes. And at one point, she tasked the group with an art making component, again, using very easy materials. This one was based on Kandinsky. So we were drawing circles, you were tracing the bottom of cups, anything that you had available. But she put music on, which was really great. She goes, okay, now we're going to have about 20 minutes of just very quick art making. It wasn't a very extensive project. So it was like we were all still together while the music was playing. Everyone could go into their own kind of place, make their art. And then we came back and did a sharing. And I did a screenshot, we had like a quick art exhibition of all the work. And the timing seemed to work, I think, because we broke it up. And it wasn't just lecture based, obviously, but it also kind of provided time for them to just go off on their own, be in the flow, making their own art. And I think that worked. We were happy with that. We're going to try that model again in the fall. So I'll let you know.
Laura, that's great.
Sure.
And this is Annie again. I want to just affirm that idea of taking breaks. One other thing that we've sometimes done in programs is just let people know, you know, again, what's your comfort level? If we love seeing your faces if we're able to, if you want to have your camera on, but also we've started sort of using language about, look, if you need to get up and walk away, you know, we want to respect that, and we want everybody else to respect that everybody is here participating in the program in a way that works for them. So if, you know, if you need to get up, if you need to move your body, if you need to go to the bathroom, go get your tissue, you know, just take a break, turn your screen off and back on. Like, we've been actually trying to state that at the beginning a little bit more in our programs, which I think makes people feel a bit more comfortable and may address that issue of screen sharing. And I see Barbara Stimler has written something. Should we read that? Or Barbara, do you want to talk about the program that you're innovating?
Sure. Hi, I'm Barbara Stemler. I'm a white cis woman. I'm wearing a black shirt. I have a very blank sort of wall behind me with the exception of some cool framed records. And I will be honest, so I'm currently not working at the museum. I'm one of many educators who's been laid off. So this is talking in the past tense. And I think I also want to just acknowledge that's, I don't hear enough people talking about it in person, in conversation with one another. But anyway, so I was at the National Children's Museum. You know, I'm very proud of all of the digital work that we did. And so one of the things we tried was doing this school program. We were doing daily videos that were about 4 to 7 minutes in length, that we were pre-recording so that we could do captions when we posted them, but they were daily and it was a lot of work. But we wanted to do more for school groups because they needed more, teachers needed more. We were trying to figure it out. So we wanted to do a more sort of content heavy experience. We did a 20-minute pre-recorded field trip that had a lot of resources, and it took 2 full months for us to produce. Whether it was writing the script and then filming it, we spent a little bit of time in the museum, but most of it was outdoors. It was just a massive creative project that if folks have done it in the past, you can raise your hand, or if you're thinking about it, it's great work. It just took a lot of time, and we were offering it for free. And so then we spent a lot of time creating grant proposals to get more money so that we could do it again. And meanwhile, offering it for free on the website, you're getting teachers. We set up a form so that teachers had to request it so we could capture their email and understand where in the country they were coming from. But besides that, it was for free. So we're seeing these requests from teachers and informal educators and parents who were just interested in advocating for their child. And we're seeing, you know, like 10, 20 requests a day, you know, like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think the funding issue is massive as well. Like, museums just need money to survive, but then to do these kinds of rich, in-depth programs, if it's new, if you weren't already doing something like this, how do you find the money to continue it? So that's my soapbox. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. And I think you bring up the point of resources and sort of how we make this work continue. And that's another thing we wanted to dedicate some space to in our time now, 15 minutes together, is to really coming from knowing that there's a lot of scarcity and feelings of scarcity that have affected people in real ways, like losing our jobs. But also reminding ourselves of our abundance and the resources and capacities that we do have. So with that in mind, if there are other resources, grants that you know are out there, ideas or even questions, things that you wanted to ask and bring into the space, want to make some time for that. Or continue sharing ideas or things that you've been experimenting with and evolving with.
Mm-hmm. This is Julene again. I just wanted to give kind of a +1 to the comment that Laura made in describing their program, of offering kind of that parallel play moment. As an introvert, I love parallel play where everybody can be doing their own thing, but we're doing it together at the same time. And in the same virtual space these days, That's really great. And it's, again, it just reminds me something that I'm guessing that most everybody on this call knows, is that what makes something accessible for one audience generally enhances the experience and is good educational design, or just is positive for all people who participate in the experience. So yay. I also wanted to just mention the practical nature of Rev, if people haven't tried Rev before. And if you think that the captions are decent, Rev has a 7-day trial, and then it's $20 a month after that. This is just our 7-day trial that we're using right now. I haven't used it later we will find out what the transcript looks like after this, but that's just something to know, and it integrated pretty easily with Zoom.
Can I, hi, me again. Sorry, I forgot to describe my background. I'm on a tan couch trying to avoid 2 dogs. They're in the other room, which is good, with just an image that one of my sons painted. So I just wanted to add one other. We're also working with people with Alzheimer's, and we had there goes one of our dogs, sorry. I wanted to add something that we just did one yesterday, so it's all fresh in my brain, and we worked in collaboration with a senior center. They usually do come to the museum on site. So we did it online, and one piece of it that really worked well, we were looking at the teaching artist. We were looking at Matisse cutouts, and looking at the idea of the color blue. The whole exhibition is about the color blue. So we looked at Matisse's cutouts and the kind of buoyancy of the figures moving. So because we had 6 seniors in their homes, they're not able to go to the senior community, we actually had them move their upper body to replicate the motion of the figures, of the cutouts. And I think it was good because it kept it very active. I think working with seniors that are probably on a lot of medications and they're home, they get a little bit quiet. We kept, again, changing things up. So there was music, there was a sense of movement, and you didn't have to get out of your chair. You could just move one part of your body. And that seemed to work very well. So integrating that, I thought, was successful.
Great. And that was Laura Lynch. And Laura, what institution are you at?
Oh, hi, I'm from the Nassau County Museum of Art in Roslyn Harbor, Long Island.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome, neighbor.
Yeah, hello. Nice to see you.
Hi, this is Gwen. I want to acknowledge Jamie asked about the Rev captions, that they seem pretty good, but there is a big delay. And that is, yes, that is one of the challenges with the automated captions, as well as they're not always 100% accurate. Best practice would be to have, simultaneous captioning happening, CART services provided, or ASL interpretation. Those do cost, they do have a higher cost associated with them. But one of the ways, and maybe Annie can speak more to this, we have been dropping some of the questions in the chat, but you can also, scaffold your program in a way that you are providing some of that key content at transition points in the program, so that you are providing that information not only verbally, but you're also providing it again written in the chat. Maybe Annie, you want to expand on that some?
You pretty well said what needed to be said. But it's always nice to provide information in as many different formats as possible, and also give as many people as many different avenues as possible to participate. Per the captioning question, and we've also had a question in the chat now about ASL interpretation and how well that has worked for online programming. Just from experience at MoMA, we have tried Otter.ai and we've also tried Rev, and they are definitely less expensive for Zoom meetings in particular than live captioning. However, each has pros and cons. So like between the two of them, you know, Rev is great because the captions appear right in the Zoom window, but there is this delay. Otter maybe has less of a delay and the transcript is prettier once it's done, but the captions appear in a completely separate window. And if you're really short on resources, I mean, there's one hack that is a possible, again, not necessarily the best option, but another thing that could work is having someone in the conversation take really great notes and post resources in a shared document that might have a little less delay, wouldn't be word for word. Again, this is not captioning, but it is one way that I've seen some organizations that, you know, that for maybe the captioning doesn't work as well for their audiences, it is one way to hack that on the shoestring budget. Again, it's not something I'd necessarily recommend for a public program, but for some other programs, it certainly can be really handy. And it's just another way of helping people get information.
Annie, and I guess anybody else, has anyone done any actual virtual, this is Madison, I'm sorry, any virtual programming through Google Meet? Because that does have auto captioning, and I'm just wondering how Zoom sort of became like the king of virtual programming. I don't know.
Madison, that's a great question. I would welcome other people's thoughts. We tried Google Meet at first for when, again, the Art Insight program is what I keep going back to because that's the first one we really opted to adapt. And Google Meet we tried because for a while we were not allowed as an institution to use Zoom because of certain security issues, which now have been mediated. Like you can avoid these issues of security. So our first Art Insight at Home program was in Google Meet, and a couple of things. We found that our audience was preferred Zoom. They felt more comfortable with it, I think, because it's part of like that snowball effect of it's more common, so it becomes more comfortable, so it becomes more common. So there was a bit of that. And we also found that Zoom had a little bit more ability as a facilitator in terms of control. And for example, you could set things in Zoom that would allow only certain folks to be able to share the screen, whereas in Google Hangouts we had issues where like people were just randomly starting sharing their screen, which is, you know, can be interesting. We do use Google Hangouts internally for all our informal meetings, but we've shifted to Zoom for a public programming. But yeah, that built-in captioning is definitely a big pro for Google Meets. I also know that some folks are using WebEx and TeamViewer. So if anybody has any thoughts about those for public programming, please feel free to share that. And there's also the phone.
This is Julie, and I just wanted to highlight Kennett's comment in the chat of a recommendation to use a live captioner whenever possible to support interpreters who are partners in our work. So again, hiring professionals, and these are professional skills, just like it's inappropriate to ask a bilingual staff member to do translation. You also should be hiring professionals to do your, you know, captioning, etc.
Thank you, Julie. This is Gwen. I just want to add on to the Google Hangout and Google Meet discussion. I have seen it used in an interesting way with the Death to Museums group, if you've heard about them. They held their first virtual conference in early August, and we'll have another one next week. And I participated in that first one, and the way they ran it, because they had like 2,000 people show up and no budget, so they couldn't have a GoToWebinar or anything like that to manage that scale. They created a Google Hangout where the speakers were, that we were in that space, and then they were live broadcasting that space to YouTube. So all of the participants were watching the program on YouTube where built-in captioning was available. It had its limitations as well. And they have said as a group that they are trying to fundraise to be able to provide live captioning and interpretation. But that was their workaround, which I thought was a really smart way to maximize these different platforms and create as much accessibility as possible.
This is Annie. I'd like to call out something that is happening in the chat. Folks talking about QR codes, just to shift gears a little bit. QR codes, and apparently someone mentioned that there's been a little bit of controversy, and I'm wondering if you might be willing to come on mic and mention what you're talking. It's Kathy. Kathy Fitzgerald, if you wouldn't mind coming on. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But I would love to hear more about what this controversy is, because I know that's something that MoMA has finally started to put on their labels as QR codes.
I'm sorry, I can't really speak to specifics. I've just been reading a lot about accessibility in galleries, and I know in Chicago we have, I'm a lead museum educator at the Smart Museum of Art. And in Chicago, we have a big, a statue exhibit, I'd say, around the city. Talking statues that uses the QR codes. But outside of that, I don't have any experience with it except what I've read. And that's why I thought I would pose the question to all the experts here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with QR codes is for how folks who are blind or have low vision work with them. That would be what I would consider a potential pitfall. So, if anybody else has thoughts about QR codes and if you found them successful, and what we've been doing is using them as a new way to, as the museum opens, it's going to be the main way that folks access the audio tour on their own devices, as opposed to having to punch in numbers. And so in some ways it's a little bit easier because perhaps your phone can find a QR code when you visually can't necessarily see it. But I want to sort of also throw that out there and add, Madison has asked another question about how institutions have been incorporating audio description. If anyone has thoughts on that, as maybe digitally or as we begin to reopen.
I guess to clarify, I meant more in these sort of virtual spaces. I feel like we've just been sort of encouraging people to live describe either their PowerPoints themselves, what have you. And I don't know if anybody has been doing anything differently.
It's a good question, Madison. Thank you.
This is Julene. I've been taking a virtual course called CELC, the Cultural Equity Learning Community, I believe, and it's out of an organization in Boston. And they do a really, really nice job of modeling slide description. And so it's a little bit different, but if people would like to listen to and see a good example of that, what I like about it is they usually have two people presenting at any one time, which is great to have not just one voice, but the person who's presenting at the moment, it's usually the other person who does the slide description. So there's this nice look back and forth, I find.
Gwen, we've been asked to repeat the name of the organization you mentioned, Deaf to Museums. Okay, and actually people have been answering it in the chat. Deaf, DEATH to Museums was the organization Gwen mentioned that had the Google Hangouts conference.
And I just dropped the link to their website. They're also active on Instagram and Twitter, so you can find a lot of their updates, and the recordings from that first conference are available on YouTube still as well. I want to acknowledge that we are coming to the end of our time and some questions are coming in. So I think we've answered many. I'm just sort of live looking through. I just want to point out that Kinneret shared the Chicago Cultural Access Consortium hosted a session back in April focused on leading accessible virtual programs. She acknowledges that we maybe have done some learning since April, but the link was shared and we can share it again here as well. You can watch that program. Any other resources we want to share out as we start to bring to a close?
This is Julene one last time. Wanted to push out, you all will be the first to hear about this as far as getting a live link. You've probably, if you've been to another peer-to-peer, you might have heard about it. So Randy Corn and Associates, the gold standard of museum evaluation, has offered to do a pro bono survey for us to measure the impact of COVID-19 on the museum education field. So there is a link, a SurveyMonkey link there to that survey. So please fill it out. Please share it with all of your colleagues. The data that we gather from this will really help us get a sense of if and how museum education departments are being more negatively impacted than other departments during this financial crisis. And I will add to the list of folks who have lost their jobs during this time. I also was laid off during COVID. Also want to mention that we're taking a pause in peer-to-peer for September, and then we're planning to relaunch in October or November, probably with the once a week has been quite a rapid pace for us, so we're going to probably switch to once every 2 weeks. But I will, my last thing that I will say is a huge thank you to Annie and Gwen for putting together this amazing conversation. I will be putting it up on our YouTube website to share, and I will send out that link to everybody who registered so you can check it out later. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Gwen and Annie for any last comments or thoughts.
Thank you, Julene. And I just want to echo appreciation for peer-to-peer in this community, enabling us to come together and share ideas and just see one another, reminding us that we're all in this together. One other logistical note I do want to mention, since we have dropped a lot of things in the chat, you should be able to save that chat on the bottom over there. You might see, I have it says file, and then there's a 3 dots, and it says save chat. So if there are ways you want to go back and access these resources, that's one way to save them if you didn't have a chance to click and bookmark as we went along.
And I've been trying to add the chats to the recordings on YouTube so that they're with it as well.
Wonderful, thank you, Julene. So I'll just say the last thing is keep going. I know that we're all tired, and I know that there's a lot that we're all processing and managing at this point, but just a reminder that you're all doing valuable, important work, but also remember to take care of yourselves in this process and keep advocating for your visitors wherever possible. So thank you all. Annie, anything you want to share before we head out?
Just a huge thank you to NAEA Museum Ed Division for making these happen, and just a huge thank you to everybody in this space, you know, not only for how you have contributed to the conversation today, which was really wonderful, but also for all of the work that you do, you know, whether you have a job or not, you're still doing this work, you're still, you know, advocating through how you live your lives. And I just honor all of you and appreciate all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie. All right, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.